Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We have a great panel, the last panel, and in this case, we really did save the last for best. So before introducing our distinguished panelists, let me just set the scene a little bit with a discussion about nuclear energy. So nuclear energy represents about 11% of all the electricity generated in the world today, and about 30%, the largest share, of low-carbon energy produced in the world today. Proponents say it is an important answer to climate change, and opponents say it's too risky and too expensive. Well, tonight, to give us some insights, we have a distinguished panel to join us, which I'll introduce from the left to right. First, Mr. Nobuo Tanaka, the chairman of the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, as well as the former executive of the International Energy Agency and a former senior official of the Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry, METI, in Japan. Next to him, we have Mr. Maher El-Odan, the Chief Atomic Officer of King Abdullah City for Atomic and Renewable Energy, which is a key player in the recently announced Saudi nuclear program. Next to him, we have Mr. Mohamed Al-Hammadi, the Chief Executive Officer of the Emirates Nuclear Energy Corporation, which is building 4 nuclear reactors not far from here in the western region of Abu Dhabi. And finally, we have the Honorable Ellen Tauscher, the former Undersecretary for Arms Control and International Security Affairs at the U.S. Department of State, as well as a former member of Congress, and many other things. I won't spend a lot of time going into the biographies of the panelists, but I encourage you to look them up on the website for the Council. So with that, I'd like to start off our discussion consistent with the title, Nuclear Energy, New Actors, New Technology, and New Geopolitics. And we're going to start by talking about actors. So in the world today, some states are building nuclear power plants. The UAE, Saudi Arabia has announced their intention to do so, even as other states like Germany have announced their intention to abandon it. Even some of the major supplying nations like France and Korea have indicated a desire to reduce their reliance on nuclear energy. So as a first question, I'd like to go to Mr. Mohamed Al-Hammadi. As a country that's looking to embrace nuclear power for the first time, can you give us some insight into your reasons and the rationale behind embracing nuclear power today?
Okay. Thank you, David. I'm very honored to be here. I know it's late in the day, so we try to give you enough energy, and excitement to listen. The UAE, when we embarked on nuclear, we did a very comprehensive assessment on what are the options that are available. This was in 2007, 2008. Looking at today, nuclear proven to be a very secure, safe, and reliable source of energy. If you look at CO2 emissions, nuclear is one of the best sources to avoid CO2 emissions. Today, if you look at Europe, they managed to achieve around 50% reduction on their CO2 emissions. That coupled with renewable and nuclear together, and that's a great achievement for Europe. Looking at the UAE now, we are diversifying our energy portfolio with a very long-term, far-sight thinking to create a diversified portfolio of energies that is clean, safe, and reliable. We have the renewable, and the panel before us were talking about renewable. We'll be having soon the nuclear to come online, and that will avoid equivalent of around 21 million tons of CO2 emissions on an annual basis, when we have the 4 units operational. That also will provide a base load that provides a very stable source of electricity to the grid. Will definitely complement also the cheaper renewable, which is also coming in online in a faster than previous. So to answer your question, David, is specifically, nuclear is a proven technology. It has almost zero CO2 emissions, and also is a great baseload source for any nation who want to have a diversified portfolio of energies.
Thanks, Mr. Al-Hammadi. Mr. Al-Odan, can I ask you to give us, some contrast? Is Saudi Arabia thinking about it the same way as the UAE, or are there other factors at play that you're thinking about? I know there's a bigger focus on localization of technology in Saudi Arabia. Could you talk to us about the Saudi vision for nuclear energy and why you've decided to embrace it?
Well, thank you, David. Actually, maybe the same line as that, as a nation to decide and to get into nuclear, it has the strategic objective to diversify the energy supply and energy security. And this diversification of energy is very critical for any nation. And each nation has to look at its own characteristics. As you know, with the Emirates, they have a very successful program, the nuclear. We're looking to diversify our energy, to do more in the localization. As you know, we have a very good industry base in oil and gas, and we would like to expand that to go into nuclear. Getting into nuclear is not just a matter to supply power. Actually, it is into diversifying the economy as well, creating jobs, creating industry. All of that, it has to come into the whole picture. So getting into nuclear for Saudi Arabia, it is a decision that was made. As you know, it is an oil-rich country. It is not only economical, but strategical as well. And also very important is to build the capacity and the industry in Saudi Arabia. We're looking now at a decision to make 2 reactors, but it is look in the future for a continuity of a base load generation, which is an energy supply that's very much needed to Saudi Arabia.
Thank you very much. That's very insightful. Before I go to Mr. Tanaka here to ask a little bit about the situation in Japan, just recognizing in Japan, of course, the implications of Fukushima and the shutdown of what had been one of the largest nuclear fleets in the world. The aftermath of that shutdown, of course, we saw in Japan increase in the rise of the cost of electricity, as well as increase in the rise of carbon emissions. So in light of both that accident, as well as these implications that came afterwards, Mr. Tanaka, can you talk to us about how Japan is thinking about nuclear energy today in light of the first steps that are being taken to restart the nuclear fleet?
Thank you very much. This is a really challenging question for all the Japanese government officials as well as politics and the public. The nuclear issue is after the Fukushima accident. This is a public trust or public confidence issue in the government policy, energy policy as a whole. Government is saying that we will have nuclear power about 20% of the future power mix in 2030. So for that, the restarting of the shutdown reactors are happening gradually. Out of 48 reactors, 9 reactors are restarting and now operating. But it took 7 years after the accident. So this process is very slow. The regaining the public confidence is really tough. And still more than half of the population, if you ask, do you support the restarting of the power plant, they say no. So to make these people convinced, certainly we need to show that the safety is warranted by the technical advances, progresses, and strict rules, regulations, and changed behaviors and activities, government rules. So we do all the possible and necessary statements and modifications on the rules and practices, but still public is not so convinced. So we are very much concerned now that luckily, but the renewable energy, we have discussed a lot, and the cost of renewable energy is getting cheaper and cheaper. The IEA, when I was the head of the IEA some time ago, but recently the IEA announced that the solar power will be the cheapest source of the new power generation in the near future for many countries. This declaration was really shocking for me because building the new reactor, the large light water reactor, the current paradigm, will not commercially viable in the near future. So restarting the shutdown reactors is okay. It's very cheap. But to build the new reactor to replace the old one is probably commercially prohibitive. Means that one after another, 40 years, maybe extended to the 60 years lifetime, the reactor will be decommissioned one after another. Then what Japan is going to do with these reactors, replacing them totally by renewables or using more gas? This is the really challenging question for the government to answer now and to convince the public. And because of the very high cost of Japanese companies, finally Hitachi, who is trying to build a reactor under the collaboration with UK government, the Horizon project is now being aborted. Japan gave up the petition toward the Turkish project by Mitsubishi. It's gone. So now Toshiba had such a big failure with Westinghouse. So Japanese manufacturers do not have probably any options at this moment to go with the current large light water reactor paradigm, but switch to the new paradigm.
Well, before we get into that discussion of technology, why don't we pick up on that point? You mentioned a very important company, Westinghouse, big part of the US industry, but let's talk about the US industry. You have successive administrations, former Undersecretary Tauscher, that have publicly supported nuclear power, said that they're 100% behind it, and yet the US nuclear fleet is shrinking. Can you give us some insight into what's happening in the United States and what would need to change for that dynamic to change?
Well, thank you, David. I'm honored to be with my colleagues. Both when I was in the Congress, I supported the UAE 123 agreement, and then as Undersecretary, I got to sign it. So I'm happy to be back here to celebrate what is going to be, I think, a terrific industry. In the United States, the complications of getting permits to be able to build, public opinion issues, the question of safety risk, and then, frankly, the financial piece of the companies in the business has deteriorated. So it is not the right mix to be, I think, enthusiastic about the future. But I think we need to be, because I think that it is very important to have nuclear in the mix in the United States. It's important for us to have the technology. It's important for us to be able to be a leader in the business. So we've got to find a way to turn that around. Part of it, I think, is a question of how do you build the correct strategic narrative that deals with the political issues. As a politician, it's not easy to stand up and say that you are for nuclear power in the United States and from California. We were very lucky to have the National Resources Defense Fund and the Sierra Club come out and be very clear about the fact that nuclear power is vital to our ability to have carbon neutral economy. So there is a real case there for the climate change folks, of which we all should be climate change folks. But you have to deal with the fact that you need a big educational push. I was commiserating with Mr. Tanaka. It is not for the faint of heart in politics to stand up and say you're for this, but that's what we need. Because in the end, the governments have to lead. This is too big of a complicated issue just for the commercial side of the house, just companies and businesses to deal with. So you need government leadership. You need it in the United States, local, county, and state, and then federal. But we really haven't had the attention, and most Americans know we have a big problem with no storage. They know about risk, and they know about the permitting issues. They really don't understand why it's good for them. So you need a buffet of things to talk about that give people a sense of balance. Of course there's risk in almost everything, but it's manageable risk. And I think the benefits are significant, but we need to have a political debate where the facts are presented, people can assess them, and give people something to be for. And I think there's a way to do that. We haven't found it yet.
Thank you very much. So before I get to the next question, I'll also point out that we have in the audience individuals with microphones, and we'll be ready to take questions. So if you have questions, signal, and one of the individuals standing with a microphone here will come and find you, and I'll find my way to you as well. So next question, I want to turn this discussion of the actors in the nuclear industry in a slightly different direction. And we sort of referenced this a little bit, that both in the US and in Japan, it's very difficult to build new nuclear reactors. Both of those states were, for a long time, big suppliers of nuclear energy. In fact, the United States, for a long time, really the primary supplier of nuclear energy to other countries. So you have the US, you have Canada, you have France, you have Russia, you have China, Japan, and Korea. They're the big actors today. But it seems like there's some shakeup. The countries that are building the most nuclear reactors today are Russia and China, and the traditional international suppliers are not building as many. What does that shakeup mean? I invite any of the members of the panel to volunteer their thoughts about what that shakeup means to the industry and what should we expect in the future. Mr. Tanaka, it looks like you might have a response.
Yeah, well, I think that the Japanese, would say, suppliers are in trouble because of the cost issues. It could be same, I mean, to the other players, Russia, Korea, or China. Because when I see that China has a huge, very ambitious plan to build light water reactors in the future, 30 gigawatts more by 2020, and then further 50, 60 gigawatts later. But this kind of new expansion of light water reactor paradigm would be very difficult because the cost of nuclear power plant building in China is definitely much cheaper than in Japan, for example, maybe a third. But the cost of building the wind or solar power plant is even cheaper, a third of what the power generation, I mean nuclear power costs in China. So Chinese government is the plan to build the major reactor fleet, but I think very likely they will give up very soon. So I don't know about Russia, but this light water reactor paradigm itself is obsolete. Now it is time to think different. There are many small companies in the United States testing the small modular reactors, advanced reactor fourth generation. And if any hope of the nuclear in the future, they are in these new technology companies.
So before we go to that technology discussion, we have a response here. Mohamed, go ahead.
I would like to give you points here. So I will use the UAE example, and I will extrapolate. So in the UAE, when we did the technology review internationally, we looked at where there is power plants being built, and there is the supply chain, the know-how, the expertise, so we don't fall in a hiccup or a bump along the way. So I've seen, personally, between Korea, systematically never stopped building, and over the last 40 years. So they have the infrastructure, the supply chain, the capabilities to do that in a repetitive and systematic manner. Looking west, there was some stopping and restarting, and that created, I would say, the gaps in the supply chain, and that nuclear industry requires very high quality equipment, very talented people, very competent people, very capable people have to work in a very high standard industry. So that's why you need a very strong, capable human capital, supply chain, regulation, infrastructure, and legislation. So in the UAE, when we did the program back on the days, that we looked at all the infrastructures, people, supply chain, the rest of it, and we created like a roadmap, how to go and take the steps, step by step, to develop that and mature the infrastructure. As of today, in 2019, we have 4 power plants have been, very advanced in their construction. We have, very high caliber people. We have around 2,700 employees today, with a 60% Emiratis, and we have people from 14 nationalities, by the way, in the program. A very unique opportunity to do this right and to do it to a very high standard when it comes to nuclear safety, nuclear quality, and nuclear security. Now, looking globally, David, I'm not stretching my answer. I'm trying to paint the picture. Going east, Korea, China, they've been building a lot of nuclear power plants. India, the supply chain has been, I say perfected, but it's been, very mature. In Europe, US, there is some gaps there, and and the price is being paid for that gaps and those projects. So future, having Baraka, UAE project successfully will really invigorate, the West and also other parts of the world to do this in a safe and reliable manner and a cost-effective manner, because these mega projects, they need a lot of capabilities, know-how, expertise, and the patience. And as you mentioned, it takes that level of rigor, to be done at a national level. So today, with the Koreans, we have a very competent partner. We also established, I would say, new standards when it comes to making the deal bankable, to be able to sign a joint venture, finance it with private, bank, money, shows how doable this project is. And we did successfully do this with the Koreans. We have a company right now, actually two companies. One of them is the operating company, one of them is the owner company, that we own around 82%. Koreans own 18% equity in this joint venture. And we've done it on the construction side, and we look forward successfully to also complete the operation of those units.
Thank you very much. Any other thoughts on that point, please, Mr. Odan?
I like to add to what Mohamed mentioned that if you look at the nuclear industry, there's a very limited number, maybe 6 or 7 around the world that they can supply large nuclear power plant. If you look at those, most of those are vertically integrated companies, meaning that they have the design to all the way to EPC and operation and utility companies, except maybe 1 or 2. Those companies are supported by the government to a certain extent, and they depend on the local market of that country. So it's going to be very difficult for them to go and survive on the international market without expanding in the local market. So that gives pressure on their local government to support them in the local market. Sometimes you see a very strong industry and nuclear industry and very limited policy that supports them locally. That mismatch is a difficult situation for those companies. Yeah.
Great point. We have a question from the audience here. If I'd ask you to introduce yourself first and then state your question.
I'm Anton Hopko from the Moscow-based Center for Energy and Security Studies. 2 questions, if I may. First to Mr. Tanaka. Dan Poneman spoke on innovations in nuclear during the previous session, and you mentioned that for the future of the nuclear industry, it's important to develop new technologies, new types of reactors. METI working group published a new roadmap on fast reactors last December. I think it's quite ambitious to build a new reactor by 2050. How much this roadmap is supported by nuclear vendors? Hitachi, Mitsubishi, and others. And the second question, if I may, to Mr. Al-Odan, you mentioned that your program is quite similar to UAE's program. At the same time, as we know, UAE does not plan to develop nuclear fuel cycle. So what Saudi Arabia plans with this regard after the recent adjustment of the nuclear power program plans? Thank you.
Well,
some long questions. Please go ahead.
Okay.
Please, Mr. Tanaka.
May I go ahead?
Please.
Okay, well, the question is that certainly with the current paradigm, the vendors of the light water reactor systems will continue to provide the fuels and maintenance of the reactors, but probably building the new big light water reactor will be very limited. So means that maintenance sake, for the fueling sake, the vendors will continue to play the role, but gradually shifting their weight to the new type advanced reactor system, which is small modular factory built and fourth generation fast reactors. There are many different kinds. But I think the US has a very interesting technology which has been already tested and proven passive safe, inherent safety, as well as proliferation resistance and easy waste management. So these are the necessary criteria or requirements for the public to accept a new advanced reactor system. The current light water reactor, yes, offered a very good solution and diversification and national security and also the climate change mitigation, but cheap, clean, safe source of energy, that notion was lost, unfortunately, after the Fukushima accident. The vendors, government should move now much toward the new system. Otherwise, we cannot be in time because the current light water reactor will be decommissioned in 40, 60 years. It means that in 2050, I don't think the light water reactor can only survive, maybe in Abu Dhabi because it's built very soon. So later, I only hope is that we have the decision by the government where we are going and start the development of the new system. Otherwise, we are in trouble. Japan and United States finally come to the agreement and a contract. The Japanese JAEA and Department of Energy has a joint research on the integral fast reactor and pyroprocessing mechanism, which, by the way, Korean government, KAIRI, is pushing very hard. So this kind of new model of proliferation resistant and safe and easy waste management type would be the next global model of the nuclear facilities, and vendors should get into the process and learn how the new system, new supply chain means for them.
Please.
Question actually, thank you for saying that. When you said it is similar to the Emirates, it's of introducing diversification of the energy. But actually, it's very different in characteristics of our project. Last year in 2017, the characteristics of this, what we call SNAPE, Saudi National Atomic Energy Project, has 4 major components. One is to build these 2 reactors of large nuclear power plant, developing a technology which is the SMR, and that development is really to solve or to provide solution for other kind of problems other than the large nuclear power plant, such as the reduced capital, the more advanced in safety and the heat applications and desalination applications. Exploration of uranium in Saudi Arabia. We have a good indications. We have a good deposit above 60,000 tons of uranium. So there is a very strong exploration program that we are covering about 27,000 square kilometers in Saudi Arabia to looking at the potential opportunity for economic production of uranium oxide. And it's really all of these, and the 4th component, of course, is putting an independent component regulator for safety, nuclear safety. Those 4 components are the pillars of the Saudi National Atomic Energy Project, and those are, if you look at them, are project-oriented. But of course, embedded in them is the total local content by creating jobs, manpower training, localization of the value chain, and also the localization of the technology. All of that is encompassed in this project. So it has, the nature of the countries is different. The demand in power is very different. Also the population structure is very different.
Thank you very much.
David, if
go
I
ahead,
may,
Mohamed,
I would like to, because it's late in the day now, I would like to disagree with Mr. Tanaka, if you don't mind. So, when it comes to SMR, we looked at them previously, and looking at SMR, compared to the conventional Generation 3 reactors, Generation 3 reactors are with proven technology, and they are, been operational, and they provide, real power as we speak right now. And so it is achievable, doable, and we are doing them here in the UAE. And to build a nuclear program, by the way, also going back in the UAE when we did the infrastructure assessment, to be able to have a sustainable nuclear program to support the infrastructure, the regulation, legislation, the whole system within the country to support a sustainable nuclear program, you need, 4,000 to 5,000 megawatts to make the program sustainable. So to be able to have a sustainable program, you need, as I said, 4,000 plus megawatts. The SMR, or the small modular reactors, they are small in size, and they will require the same infrastructure, within the country, within a nation. So that, as an introduction program, they won't be supported, to have them safely operational, reliably operational. So that's why, as I commend, my colleague from Saudi Arabia, Dr. Mahal Udan, that, going for the conventional reactors, then going for the SMRs in the future, that's the stepped approach, which is the right approach to go to. But to go for an SMR, which is still in the design phase, which is not been implemented yet, it will be a difficult journey to do, and I think will be a risky journey to go from a commercial viability point of view. Safety, they are safe designs, and we'll see the fruition of them down the road. Traveling wave reactor, for example, we have Chris Levesque here, the CEO of the traveling wave reactor TerraPower, who it's also a great concept of design, and it's also being very very well advanced when it comes to its design, and hopefully soon we'll see one design implemented somewhere in the US of that design.
So interesting insight. Without enough electricity, not enough revenue, you can't generate a sustainable program. We have another question here. Sir, could I ask you to introduce yourself and please state your question for the panel?
Sure. Najm Meshkati, a professor of engineering and international relations at University of Southern California and research fellow with project managing the atom at Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs at Harvard. Based on your vantage point, first of all, excellent panel. Thank you very much for presentation. Based on your collective experience and vision, would you please tell us what will be or what should be the emphasis on nuclear safety? What area of nuclear safety we should emphasize? From United States, you have had Three Mile Island accident. Japan, you have had Fukushima. If there was a Russian, we had Chernobyl. And then the two newcomers. Each one of you, what is your vision and what you would like to see the emphasis in what area nuclear safety be? Thank you.
So, anyone care to volunteer the first part of that?
These are highly regulated businesses everywhere. In the United States, they're regulated both on the state level by PUC and then Department of Energy by the NERC and the FERC. So nuclear safety is the overhang, reputational overhang, that everyone has to break through. And I very much appreciate my colleague Mohamed's point about small modular reactors. Everybody wants to be the second one to do it. Nobody wants to be the first one to do it. And so we have a reputational overhang on safety. Then you have this question of newer technology. And then, let's be honest, we have the proliferation issues that we still have to maintain, commitments to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the question of closed fuel cycle, and then the question of storage and waste. So this is almost too big to bear. And so I think the question is, as I said earlier, how do you create a strategic narrative where people in their homes, people in communities, people that are going to make decisions to build these in their communities can see a balance. They can see that they have positive climate change benefits, that they have safety that they can really deliver for people. And then they've solved the other ancillary issues of storage and proliferation issues. I think all of the elements are there. It's just not been a strategic narrative that has been knitted together. And this is about selling it politically. This has got to be sold politically to gain the political capital to be able to make it easier for both governments and commercial entities to risk their capital. And that means you've got to have a sense that you're going to get a shorter permitting process, especially in the United States. Otherwise, they're just not going to be financially viable projects.
Thank you very much.
May I add, David?
Mohamed and then Mr. Tanaka, please.
So, the question to your, but when it comes to nuclear safety, it's a multi-layered, approach. First of all, you need to have very mature regulation within the country, a competent regulatory body that they can, put the rules for the program and for the power plants to operate. Then comes the technology selection. So generation 3 is a proven technology, and that's when it comes to the technological, question. Then one of the key most important areas is the competence in the human capital development, and that's where you need competent, qualified people to be able to operate those reactors. So these are the three kind of layers when it comes to setup and priorities, and then that system needs to be maintained. As David mentioned earlier, when you have enough revenue coming on the nuclear industry that keeps the industry up to speed, to qualify the people, keep the regulator, at competency, and also coupled with a niche market of R&D that will keep this material, this power plant operated safely to the standards which is designed for. So these are the most components, from my view, to be focused on.
Thank you. Mr. Tanaka, please.
Yeah, safety
So you had another one?
issues and safety standards
for you, by the
are
way.
very critical issue in Japan after Fukushima. And Japanese government introduced new security safety standards, the most strict in the global sense, and created new commission to introduce these strictest standards. But public do not satisfy. They are not satisfied with the strict standard to get the emotional security. The physical and legal standard is not enough. So the cost is marginal cost of increase of the safety measures is getting higher and higher, and it's come to the prohibitive level already. So this safety issue and mental security or emotional security should be treated separately, because by making the small modular reactor, the risk of emergency could be much smaller than relative to the big light water reactor system. Japan should introduce the emergency deep defense mechanism, which the US has already. We should have done a lot of, risk-related issues rather than the safety standard. So we have to clearly separate these issues. Otherwise, simply increasing the level of safety standard is only adding the cost to the prohibitive level to the nuclear industry. We should think about this kind of enabling regulation rather than restrictive or even forbidding regulation.
Thank you very much. So we have another question here, which I've already agreed to take. So we'll take that one, and then we'll continue on the discussion from there. Please, sir.
Thank you. My name's Craig Hart. I'm a senior fellow with the Atlantic Council. I understand from my own research that China is planning to build roughly 291 gigawatt equivalent units by 2050. Now, putting aside whether that's a realistic goal or not, I'd like to ask, it has a lot of implications. One of them is for standards, as Mr. Tanaka's mentioned. I'd like to ask two things. One, the development of the industry outside of China, in light of what China's doing, the implications for standards and quality and safety. I'd like if the panel could address that. And if there is going to be a critical mass of technology development outside of China in order to maintain what has been very important in the industry in terms of, even though it's a competitive set of competitive relationships, an open collaboration to make sure that safety is maintained. Thank you.
So two questions there. First question, right, about what does it mean if China becomes a massive deployer of technology? Are there implications for quality and safety? And then finally, if China is this massive source of nuclear technology, can we have the same kind of open system like the World Association of Nuclear Operators and the transparency that's been used in peer-to-peer reviews about performance in order to make sure that the industry stays safe? So I'll invite any of the panel members to weigh in on that question. Some may be more willing than others.
I'll go first.
Go ahead, Mohamed.
So the Chinese been building nuclear power plants for one main reason is that it's economically viable, for them to construct it, and also the key element for China is the CO2 emissions. That this is a clean source of energy, and that's, I think, anybody who's been to Beijing can you know the difference when you smell the air there. So that's their key element to go with a cleaner air for electricity production, going away from coal and other alternative sources of energy. So to the standards And they've been busy, by the way. They are barely coping to build, the nuclear power plants within their country, and they are really energizing and switching on those nuclear power plants, including the Westinghouse, the other designs also, not just the indigenous Chinese design. And also to the point of the standards and quality, I was, really happy to see the Chinese that they've even invited the peer review from the US. They had people from the One Atlanta Center and IMPO to come to the Chinese plant to demonstrate and also to raise their standards if required, to build it to the US standards, which is known for the highest when it comes to nuclear operation excellence and operational safety. So that's a demonstration by the Chinese. They want to qualify a nuclear power plant that's been subjected to the US standard for operation and to put it into service. And that power plant is also in service. I have some of my colleagues from the UAE went there to inspect that plant, and they were really happy with the operational standards of the Chinese. And that's, once the Chinese, that's my view, satisfy their market requirement, they will definitely go global with the current technology they have, or the technologies that they've developed to have a bigger, and also they have ambitious on the SMR, the smaller modular reactor. They have a couple of designs. So they are embarking on all areas when it comes to technological development and also excellence of operation and transparency of their operation of their utilities.
Maher, it looks like you had a comment to make.
Yeah, I think I just extend a little bit on the Chinese, is that they are doing both. They are trying to market their own technology outside China, which means that, coming back to the first comment, is that when you have a company that is supported by the government and there is only one company, competition becomes important to assure that you have a good quality and you have good practice and economics, all of that. So the Chinese are marketing their technology outside. They're competing with other in the world, and also they are inviting others to build reactors in China. I don't know what's the plan of how much of that in China versus the Chinese technology, but I think bringing that gives a flavor of enhancing the competition, hence the quality and the safety and all of that.
Interesting viewpoint that perhaps instead of being fearful, we should welcome Chinese exports as a way of making sure that they're getting the standards and the interactions with the international industry. As they say in the nuclear industry, an accident anywhere is an accident everywhere, right? Mr. Tanaka, you have a point. And Ellen, did you have a point on this?
No, I think that it is about raising, maintaining standards, and I think it's so far looks as if the Chinese are into an open dialogue and an open experience, as opposed to one that perhaps happens in other industries.
Excellent. Mr. Tanaka, you.
Yeah, I think for the nuclear industry, I think China's operator quite well understand that we are in the same boat. Because Chernobyl or 3 Mile Islands or Fukushima, if accident happens, it hurts everybody. And Chinese quite well understand that. After Fukushima, Japanese governments and industries definitely sending the message or lessons we learned from the accident of Fukushima, and the communication is much better than before. And Chinese investment in UK, for example, they have to live with the very stringent standard of safety there. Right. And that standard must go back to China also, because otherwise the Chinese public will not accept building the further nuclear power plant there. So for that, I'm a bit optimistic about the China's technologies and the practices for the safety in the future.
Thank you very much. So I want to turn the discussion a little bit toward the topic of technology, new technologies. And I want to be relatively quick about this because there are other topics we also want to hit before we wind up, and we're getting close to the end of our time. Let's just put the question in a blunt way. What are the technologies that will make nuclear energy possible in the future? What do we have to have in order to get there? And any views from the panels of where they see the nuclear technology going? Mr. Chuck, I know you've had some thoughts on this. Please, why don't you start off?
Yeah, I have mentioned already about this small modular reactor, but certainly everybody knows this is the future. But unfortunately, it's not yet tested anywhere. This is the commercial viability depends on the factory production process as well as regulation, new type of regulation. So this is a very, very challenging subject. We know that the US has different technologies. This integral fast reactor of the Argonne or Idaho is probably promising because Korea is interested, we are interested, we start a joint effort. And I want Saudi Arabia will be the test bed for this kind of technology. You have money, you have place, and you have the will to be a peaceful user of the nuclear power. Light water reactor no longer be the good model for the future because of the proliferation risk of enrichment like Iran or plutonium reprocessing for the bomb. So light water reactor, not only the safety issue, but proliferation risk exists. So this is not the model for the future, and Middle East needs the peaceful use of nuclear power as such, and proliferation resistant small modular type reactor is what Saudi should experiment in the future.
Maher, you never like somebody to begin a discussion with you saying you have lots of money. That's always a bad start. Any thoughts on the comments by Mr. Tanaka?
It's good to hear what's your views about our strategy, because your views comes from very traditional Western technology-oriented. So you have your problems in the industry and you're creating a technology or developing a technology to solve your legacy problems. Mm-hmm. But for Saudi Arabia as a newcomer, we have all the horizon is open to us. And we're looking at the light water reactor in general, large and also a small modular reactor. That could be a technology that would provide needs to the region from the grid capacity. There's a lot of countries, they have limited grid capacities in the region. It has a less capital requirement, much less capital requirement. The problem with that, it is 100 megawatt. You need 10 of SMRs to have one reactor of small modular. So the Baraka, you need 40 reactors together in order to supply the same power. That's another problem. So I think looking at the fourth generation, it is a cascade of technologies, not one single, fast breeder, high temperature gas cooled reactor, liquid metal cooled reactor, and light water reactor. All of that, they are all considered as a fourth generation small modular reactor, but they have different characteristics, and each country look at it differently. Some countries, they have, as I said, the legacy. Some countries, it's very difficult to shut down a technology and point to another technology at this point.
Understand. I can see Mohamed wants to correct you and say Baraka will be 60 of those small reactors, not 40. So I'll get that for you, Mohamed. Ellen, did you have any thoughts on this in terms of technologies that show promise? I know you're very involved in the national laboratories in the United States. Anything you would offer from that perspective?
I would just say that we do need a test bed for SMR, and we need someone to step up and be willing to take it on, not just be the one that's willing to do the second one or the third one. And so, I think we should work together cooperatively to figure out how we get that done, to make sure that we have not only a diversity of options for people.
Yeah.
And obviously, we still have to work on the storage issue.
Great. Now, I'm going to have to apologize because I know we have other people who have been waiting to ask questions, but we're virtually almost out of time, 2 minutes to finish, and that won't give us really time to do that. But what I would encourage you to do is approach the panelists afterwards with your questions to get those. I want to pose one final question to the panelists. This is the look into your crystal ball question. So here we are today. We've talked about where the industry is, the challenges, the opportunities that exist. We'd like each of you to kind of reflect the future of nuclear energy. Are we gonna, this graph we've seen here, it's been roughly flat for the last 30 years. Is it gonna stay flat? Is it gonna grow? Is it going to shrink? Why do you think it's going to go the particular direction that you think? And why don't we start at this end and we'll just work our way across. Mr. Tanaka, you start.
Well, it's now flat. Probably it will decline in the future, but at some moment, I sincerely hope it will come back again with the new technologies. It is necessary to develop the new technology. We may need more time to develop new. So At certain time, the power mix should be half of the power mix could be renewables, but other half, 25% should be nuclear, and other 25 probably fossil fuel will CCUS. So this kind of combination is necessary for the sustainable future. So I think nuclear definitely will play a very important role.
Thank you very much. Maher?
I think nuclear will continue. Now it is about 10 to 15%. I think it will continue. The capacity will continue, but the percentage, it will stay the same as the global capacity increases. I think nuclear addresses two very important solutions or issues, that it's clean and it is a base generation. Renewable has difficulties in storage and being a base generation, and also in fossil fuel it has this CO2 emission. So nuclear can solve this, but it's not going to be a growth of 50 or 60% in the future.
I understand. Mohamed, your thoughts?
So on this one, I agree with Mr. Tanaka-san. So for the record, the future of nuclear will depend. As I said, Tanaka-san, it's the best complementary with renewable, and renewable is becoming very, very cheap now, which is a good, as being intermittent, and nuclear as being base load. That's a good complementary to nuclear. All will depend on how serious the world takes, global warming, and it is very, very serious. And this is maybe, a call from me that we need to take this, from policymakers and industry very, very seriously. And nuclear proven to be a very clean source of energy, and the growth of it, or up or down on how fast, it depends how the world takes global warming, how seriously they take it. So if that's taken seriously, we'll see a good growth in the nuclear side.
Ellen?
I think the United States only has 5 to 8 years to get back in the game before it is too tough for us to do. We need commercial entities that are in the business, that are American companies, that can provide safe, clean, proliferation supporting, non-proliferation supporting technology, where we're once again in the lead, where we keep standards high, and we work with our colleagues around the world to make sure that we have safe, affordable mix of power that includes nuclear.